2 years after the outbreak of COVID-19, China is battling with its highest ever case numbers. The country's largest city, Shanghai, is the worst hit. 26 million people there are under strict lockdown. But as China pursues its strict zero-COVID policy, cracks in people's patience are beginning to show. Fabian Kretschmer reports.
For weeks, the streets of Shanghai have been empty. Supermarkets are shut. Delivery workers that would normally be weaving their way through the city are nowhere to be seen. Social media is full of cries for help and complaints about a lack of food. Some videos show unrest in neighborhoods where people are desperate to find food. And in one unverified video, people are even seen looting a supermarket. Authorities are scrambling to deliver supplies, but there are huge problems.
For delivering vegetables, some are getting their food early, some are getting it late. It has a big impact on people's lives.
Chin Yen Lei is a tomato farmer who works on the outskirts of the city. He's doing his part to try and help. He's moved out of his home and into a dorm at the industrial greenhouses, where his company grows tomatoes. This is a video he shot on his phone of the room he's staying in.
We're understaffed at the moment and need to ensure we keep up production, so we start work early and work overtime for about 2 hours a day.
But reports say the biggest hurdle in the delivery of goods is at the last mile. Many delivery workers and other supply personnel remain under lockdown themselves. The challenge is in getting food from markets and warehouses to people's homes. The local government is now trying to mobilize delivery workers to get back to work, as long as there aren't any positive cases within their residential compounds. The bottlenecks could pose a serious problem to the government. Frank Tsai is CEO and founder of China Crossroads and a risk specialist. He's a resident of Shanghai and has been under lockdown himself for over a week.
When you induce food insecurity to a country whose purpose is to modernize and make people's lives better, I think it adds a certain twist that people here and the leadership here are not so comfortable with.
For the past 2 years, China has touted its approach towards containing the virus and pointed towards its rampant spread in the West as a marker of its superiority.
This could break the narrative that China's system is better at doing this, especially if it really explodes in the next few weeks. So we could be at quite an inflection point in how COVID evolves and how the world comes to see China's performance on COVID.
But how its own people see it is what matters the most. And authorities will need to get a handle on the situation quickly to prevent people's frustration from spiraling any further.
Well, earlier I spoke to Fabian Kretschmer, who filed that report.
Yeah, so basically the city has been separated into 3 different categories. If you live in a residential compound, meaning your apartment complex, your neighborhood community, where there were cases detected within the last week, that means you cannot even leave your flat. If you live in a compound where there were no cases detected in the last week, but within the last 2 weeks, so basically the last 14 days, then you're allowed to leave your flat, but can only go within your gated community. You're not allowed to go to the street. And only for those people who live in a neighborhood community where there were no cases for the last 2 weeks, they are allowed to go to the street now, but only in a confined area, and there's really not much to do. So, I mean, public transportation is basically shut. All the public facilities are shut. So, I mean, it is an easing, but a very cautious one. And as soon as there's only one single case within your whole neighborhood, the community shuts down again. So it's really precarious.
Right, so you can't travel to Shanghai. We're hearing from these restrictions that you've just mentioned. What's your sense of how serious the situation is there in Shanghai?
Well, it's an emergency situation, which slightly gets better by time, but basically you can see how serious the situation is by the by the decision of the U.S. consulate in Shanghai today. They basically forced their non-essential staff to fly out because they cannot guarantee their safety. And when I talk to residents, both locals and also expats, their concerns are really quite existential. They fear that the food supply will not be enough. They fear that they get separated from their children if the children test positive. They also, in general, are not so much afraid of the virus, but more afraid of getting dragged into the isolation centers, because the hygienic conditions there are really quite devastating, and you basically are locked there with several thousands of people, and it's really not a pleasant experience. So I think it's getting better with time, and we saw the recent easing, but it's a really tense situation.
Fabian, are there any signs that the government is perhaps rethinking how it deals with the virus?
So far, not really. I mean, the economic costs are really going high. I mean, we know that the global supply chains, they are really stressed right now. The services sector is going down, the manufacturing sector. I mean, basically 90% of the big cities here in China have been to some degree affected by lockdowns in the last 2 months. But I think the government is committed also because of their own propaganda. They stated that we can manage zero COVID. We are the only country that can contain the virus. And that is a proof of our superiority. And now to change that course, it is really very difficult also to justify towards their own population.
That was Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing.